secretagogue and ghrelin receptor agonist, like I mentioned, and what it does is it increases the endogenous secretion of GH and IGF-1. Basically, a growth hormone secretagogue is simply a substance that signals the pituitary gland in your body to secrete more growth hormone, and it's bioavailable orally, therefore it can be swallowed and no injections are needed, which is largely why this has so much promise in a clinical setting. To date, there have been no viable orally bioavailable alternatives to synthetic human growth hormone injection. Much like SARMs, it is non-steroidal, but contrary to popular belief, MK677 is not a SARM in any capacity, despite commonly being thrown into that category. MK677 will not negatively affect natural testosterone levels or endocrine function in any capacity at all, as it does not suppress natural testosterone or any male sex hormone. It has a much longer shelf life than reconstituted growth hormone and does not need to be stored in the fridge or freezer to prevent degradation. Clinical trials are currently assessing how viable of a potential treatment MK677 is for addressing growth hormone deficiencies, muscle wasting diseases, osteoporosis, and a myriad of other related conditions. Just some of the effects, well, all the effects of it: increases bone mineral density in a 12-month study conducted on postmenopausal osteoporotic women. 25 milligrams of MK677 per day increased bone mineral density as well, and was well tolerated without any significantly concerning side effects. In a 2-month randomized double-blind parallel placebo-controlled study on 24 healthy obese men ages 19 to 49, 25 milligrams of MK677 per day increased markers of bone formation within the first 2 weeks and increased serum osteocalcin levels at the 2-month mark. Predictably, large increases in serum IGF-1 levels were also noted in a clinical setting, or in a clinical study, evaluating the changes in serum IGF-1 and markers of bone turnover in 187 elderly adults aged 65 or older, lasting 2 to 9 weeks. Dosages of 10 to 50 milligrams were administered once daily. All treated individuals experienced increased bone turnover, regardless if they were healthy or functionally impaired men or women. Builds muscle. Now, this is a bit convoluted and a bit, debatable. Growth hormone can accelerate lipolysis and has an anabolic effect in muscle tissue by increasing insulin-like growth factor, IGF-1, and nitrogen retention. Is this going to equate to real lean tissue, or just essentially inflate the muscle with intramuscular water and nitrogen? That's kind of a debatable concept, because there are no studies that really prove blatant muscle growth from growth hormone or growth hormone secretagogues that was accurately measured. So let's get into that. But basically, the clinical data asserts that it builds muscle. So in a 2-month study on 24 healthy obese men using 25 milligrams of MK per day, 3 kilograms of lean muscle mass was gained in the MK677 treated group compared to the placebo group. According to a DEXA scan, total body fat did not change during the study, equating to a total gain of 6.62 pounds of muscle in the MK677 treated group. However, it should be noted that this conclusion has limitations, like I mentioned, due to the fact that intracellular water very likely contributed to a fair portion of that fat-free mass that was gained. So regardless of the fact that fat-free mass is interpreted by most as muscle gain, it's not always the case. So can we say it actually gained 6.62 pounds of muscle? Probably not. Realistically, most of it was probably water and nitrogen. In another study conducted on 65 healthy men and women, does that necessarily mean that's a bad thing, though, for bodybuilding purposes, or for whatever purpose, offsetting, musculoskeletal diseases and stuff like that? Not necessarily. It still has its attributes. It's just inaccurate, very likely inaccurate, to state that it's going to build 6 point whatever pounds of muscle in that period of time. Keep in mind, these statistics can be skewed based on the measurement technique. In another study conducted on 65 healthy men and women ages 60 to 81, 25 milligrams MK677 per day increased fat-free mass by 1.6 kilograms relative to placebo. The average lifetime loss of fat-free mass in adults is approximately 5.5. Therefore, MK677 has exhibited the potential to offset aging-induced catabolism by as much as 29%. So that's measured in kilograms. Increase Increases basal metabolic rates. Basal metabolic rate was increased by MK677 at 2 weeks of treatment, even after correction for the increase in fat-free mass. Due to its positive effect on body composition, there is a case to make in regards to MK677 being a possible treatment for obesity. Now, what this study doesn't take into account is the fact that a ghrelin receptor agonist is going to pretty much eliminate the opportunity for, unless somebody was overeating to begin with, spiking somebody's hunger hormone is likely not going to lead to a very efficacious treatment for obesity, to say the least. But that's my own personal input, and I'm sure if you've recreationally used MK, you can attest to the fact that sticking to a obesity-friendly diet is nearly impossible with your ghrelin being artificially secreted. So, increases in nitrogen retention. MK677 exhibits blatant anti-catabolic properties, one of which is the ability to retain nitrogen even in a steep calorie deficit. 8 healthy volunteers ages 24 to 39 were calorically restricted 18 calories per kilogram per day for 2 14-day periods. During the last 7 days of each diet period, subjects received either 25 milligrams of MK677 orally or placebo once daily. MK677 reversed nitrogen wasting caused by the caloric deficit and suggests that if these short-term anabolic effects are sustainable, it could be a viable treatment for those experiencing chronic disease or other muscle wasting catabolic conditions. Improved sleep quality. A study with 8 young subjects 18 to 30 years old and 6 older subjects 65 to 71 found that MK677 was able to increase REM sleep by as much as 50%, which is quite substantial. Many anecdotal logs report much deeper sleep as a result of MK677 usage, as well as myself. The sleep is incredibly deep. You're going to have way more vivid dreams with it. Obviously not condoning its recreational use. It's just a fact that it increases, anything that increases GH is going to do that. For the most part, obviously individually dependent. Longevity. Natural growth hormone secretion downregulates with age, consequently lowering serum IGF-1 levels in the body, which results in significant lean muscle catabolism and increased mortality. By restoring GH and IGF-1 levels to that of young healthy adults, it is likely that a significant amount of muscle and bone degradation could be prevented entirely. In a study conducted on 65 healthy men and women ages 60 to 81, 25 milligrams of MK677 treatment per day resulted in increases in GH and IGF-1 levels to levels seen in young adults. In another study conducted on 161 hip fracture patients aged 65 and older, 25 milligrams MK677 treatment per day increased serum IGF-1 levels by 84%. Higher levels of IGF-1 are also associated with longer telomere length, which is a generally accepted marker of aging. Granted, there's a lot of data to show that increased IGF-1 levels are associated with quicker mortality rates, but the data is contradictory in this respect, and just keep that in mind though. And that's a note from myself that spiked HGH and IGF-1 levels will likely long-term lead to cardiovascular hypertrophy issues, left ventricular, just general cardiovascular things that are going to be associated with anything that induces muscle growth in the body or hypertrophy in any aspect, or water retention, or intracellular hyper response to anything. Just a side note. Improves immune system. A study on mice showed that a growth hormone secretagogue could generally duplicate the same enhancement of the immune system observed by treating mice with synthetic GH injections. Statistically significant changes in immunological parameters in the young and old mice treated with the growth hormone secretagogue were noted. Tumor resistance increased substantially, and there were signs of anti-aging, whereby a deficiency in the thymus in mice, a result of aging, was reversed entirely. Currently, growth hormone injections are an improved treatment for treating muscle wasting caused by AIDS, and the findings in this study would suggest that a growth hormone secretagogue like MK677 could fulfill a clinical need for AIDS patients and individuals undergoing chemotherapy and radiation. It would also have the obvious advantage of being orally bioavailable, whereas GH can only be administered via injection. Hair loss prevention. IGF-1 has been shown to affect follicular proliferation and differentiation, remodeling of tissue, as well as The hair growth cycle itself, and this is something I've touched on a few times in the past, more evidence is arising to suggest that IGF-1 plays an important role as a regulator in hair follicle biology. It should be noted that patients with growth hormone deficiency resulting from defective hormone binding with low serum IGF-1 levels exhibit very sparse hair growth. So that's, a very interesting statistic to note in regards to hair loss. Anecdotally, several users of synthetic GH injections and MK677 have reported a faster growth rate of their hair, as well as improved overall hair density. And that's something I have personally noted as well. Prevention of growth hormone deficiency. MK677 has exhibited the ability to increase serum IGF-1 levels and GH levels to that of a young healthy adult. Thus, it is obviously desirable to assess if it would be a potential alternative treatment to growth hormone injections for those diagnosed with growth hormone deficiency. And in a study conducted on 9 severely GH deficient men ages 17 to 34 who had been treated for GH deficiency with growth hormone during childhood, once daily dosages of 10 milligrams or 50 milligrams MK677 or placebo were administered. In the 10 milligram group, it increased serum IGF-1 levels by 52% on average and increased GH levels by 79% on average, whereas 50 milligrams of MK677 increased serum IGF-1 levels by 79% on average and increased GH levels by 82% on average. And these improvements are indicative of MK677's potential as an alternative form of treatment for GH deficiency during childhood. Mechanism of action. Growth hormone is secreted by the somatotrophies of the anterior pituitary gland in multiple pulses each day. Growth hormone is released into the bloodstream and then stimulates the liver to produce IGF-1, which stimulates linear growth before epiphyseal fusion and also exerts several metabolic effects throughout life. And after ingestion, MK677 induces somatotrophy secretion of GH via signaling the pituitary gland to secrete a sufficient amount of growth hormone. The most common cause of GH deficiency in childhood is believed to be caused by a lack of adequate stimulation of the pituitary gland by hypothalamic GHRH, which is why something like MK677, which can systemically increase IGF-1 levels for 24 hours with a single oral dose, is very promising for potential clinical use. And the likely mechanism of action following MK677 administration is the activation of the ghrelin receptor by MK677 with feedback by IGF-1, preventing excess GH production. The mechanism of action through which MK677 promotes GH secretion is comparable to growth hormone releasing peptides like GHRP6, GHRP2, ipamorelin, hexarelin, with GHRP6 being the most similar in regards to the amount of ghrelin secretion that occurs post-administration. MK677 does not stimulate, this is a huge misconception, but MK677 does not stimulate a greater quantity of secretion events per day, which is the number of GH pulsations, which a lot of people think it does. Rather, it stimulates a greater 24-hour GH production rate. So in other words, MK677 can substantially increase the strength of each GH pulsation that occurs in the body, but not increase the number of secretion events. Benefits of higher GH levels and IGF-1 levels. Healthy GH and IGF-1 levels support a variety of positive benefits in the body. As mentioned earlier, these benefits include anti-aging properties, which is why HGH is commonly referred to as the real fountain of youth. I feel that these are typically overhyped, but regardless, I'm going to get into them. The benefits of growth hormone specifically. GH promotes and increases the synthesis of new protein tissues, allowing new muscle to be built. Metabolizes fat incredibly well, improves complexion, has dramatic anti-aging properties, increases hair growth where would be desirable, improves sleeping patterns, making for fewer unintended awakenings and better REM stage sleep, produces more energy. This is individual dependent because a lot of people notice increased lethargy from it. May improve sexual performance, increases bone density, which prevents injury and helps promote healing, can improve the quality and duration of heart and kidneys. Again, another controversial benefit though, because there's arguments to be made that it does the opposite. IGF-1 benefits. IGF-1 supports cellular division, hyperplasia, making it the only hormone that can actually create brand new muscle cells via muscular cell division. supports the repair of nerve damage, lowers body fat levels, exhibits anti-aging properties by tightening up loose skin, aids in the repair of bones, tendons, and ligaments. IGF-1 hyperplasia. This is something I thought should be covered on its own in a separate subsection. So the cellular division aspect of IGF-1 is what makes it so attractive to bodybuilders and athletes, as an individual's genetic potential essentially refers to how much hypertrophy can be induced in a person's muscle cells. Only so much hypertrophy can be achieved even with the addition of exogenous anabolic steroids and or insulin. The two primary mechanisms by which muscle mass may be increased are hypertrophy, which is increase in myofiber size, and hyperplasia, which is increase in myofiber number. It's generally well accepted that there are a fixed amount of fibers within a muscle. However, it has been suggested that cell splitting can occur in these fibers, and while there's no evidence of this in humans via clinical studies, bodybuilders hypothesize that supraphysiological amounts of IGF-1 in the body can create cellular hyperplasia, whereby myofibers split in two to create brand new muscle fibers. And in theory, via this process, one could split new muscle cells and then induce hypertrophy in those new muscle fibers and achieve greater levels of musculature that would have been impossible otherwise via resistance training, diet, and hormonal assistance. Getting into MK677's clinical trials, Loomis Pharma acquired the license for ibutamoren, MK677, in September 2018. The compound was thereafter referred to as LUM-201 by the company, and that's actually what the official name of it is right now, as far as like branding or whatever. It's in phase 2 trials right now, being investigated as a potential treatment for pediatric growth hormone deficiency. To date, MK677 has been studied in more than 1,200 people, with approximately 200 of those being children and approximately 1,000 being adults and elderly patients, and was found to be generally well tolerated. Limitations. While MK677 will effectively stimulate the secretion of growth hormone in those with a functioning hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, in most cases, there are certain scenarios in which it would be completely ineffective, and those are the following: individuals with a non-functioning hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, individuals who are unable to secrete growth hormone, individuals who simply do not respond to MK677 at all, and approximately 30% of children with PGHD will not be able to restore healthy GH and IGF-1 levels with MK677 treatment. MK677 results, anecdotal and recreational use. MK677 results in an anecdotal and recreational use capacity. There are several testimonials online reviewing MK677's applications in a performance enhancing context. Obviously, this video is about clinical applications and its overall efficacy profile, but obviously touching on this is something you guys will want to hear. Not endorsing it whatsoever. It's not an approved compound for human usage. It's still in the phase 2 trial stage. Take all this with a grain of salt. These logs are anecdotal at the end of the day, but anecdotal experiences can still provide insight into how MK677 performs in scenarios that will very likely never be assessed in clinical studies. In certain cases, anecdotal logs can actually be far more insightful of important information than in clinical studies, in my opinion. And a good example of that is the selective androgen receptor modulator Andarine, which, a lot of you guys probably know can cause temporary vision impairment with its use, which is a side effect that's, obviously not reported during its development, and perhaps why it was abandoned in the first place. But there are things that you'd only find out through reading through anecdotal logs that you would not find out otherwise. Anecdotal experiences of MK677 commonly compare its effects to synthetic GH injections. It is becoming more common for athletes seeking performance enhancement to turn to MK before GH due to the prohibitive cost of GH, the convenience of oral administration over injections, more flexible storage requirements, and reportedly nearly identical results when comparing MK to modest dosages of daily HGH injections. Gains of 5 to 10 pounds of fat-free mass within the first few weeks are commonly reported. However, my personal note on that is the majority of that is likely intracellular water. So keep that in mind. I've used it a few times over the past couple of years. Each time, you know, the first week, the results are pretty dramatic in terms of intramuscular water and nitrogen retention. You get a very, you know, full look very quickly. You can jump up like 7 to 10 pounds within the first week often. Is that, you know, healthy? Probably not. Is it a good thing for bodybuilding? Depends what your goals are. But if I had to compare 25 milligrams of MK to something, I would compare it to the results of a few IUs of high quality generic growth paired with a few daily 100 microgram shots of GHRP6 coupled with 100 microgram shots of modified GRF 1-29, which I'm sure a lot of you peptide guys know the combination. It's pretty classic, but I get that ravenous hunger effect that makes it nearly impossible to adhere to a reasonable caloric intake, which is what you can expect with GHRP6. This is due to the increased ghrelin secretion that MK677 induces. The incredibly heightened appetite is the main reason I actually avoid it now, as I cannot cut down to sub 10% body fat when I have above average levels of ghrelin being secreted around the clock. Ghrelin secretion seems to subside to a large extent after attenuation of MK677's effects start to set in, which makes it more tolerable anecdotally, but I now avoid using ghrelin mimetics entirely unless I'm eating above maintenance, because it's just counterproductive at that point. And I've noticed it's seems to very significantly help with hair density and offsetting hair loss. Now, granted, my hair grows much faster and there's a remarkable improvement in overall density, but that does nothing to prevent androgenic alopecia. So keep that in mind. I also noticed significant lethargy from it, which is kind of annoying. And I used to take it before, like right before bed, to kind of mitigate that issue. But, you know, you'll probably notice it if you end up using it in a context that, let's just say you get a prescription from a doctor. Once it's approved, then that's probably something you're going to notice too. Dosages. MK677 exhibits a dose-dependent positive effect on serum GH and IGF-1 levels. The clinical data suggests that ibutamoren begins exhibiting diminishing returns above and beyond